This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
We have with us today Brian Baumgart. Brian might be the youngest distinguished speaker of this distinguished speaking series that I've ever invited. And I've been doing this now for about 5 years. It's tough to become distinguished over a short period of time, but Brian's been able to do it. Over his 15-year career, he's been an executive and had a number of startup experiences in the digital advertising and technology space. He's developed quite the track record and quite the reputation for growing high-tech, profitable, and innovative companies. It's one thing to grow a company and hire a bunch of people and then never really make any money. That's not Brian's model. He's currently CEO, and founder of GradientX, which is providing solutions, innovative solutions for marketers in the mobile advertising world. Founded the company in March of 2012, and he sold the company in September of 2013. He sold it to Singtel, which is a $55 billion communications group. So Brian will tell us a little bit about that journey, and that journey's not over. Brian's still fully engaged, and he's still along for the ride, even though he sold the company relatively quickly. For the 7 years prior to founding GradientX, Brian was an angel investor and one of the first 10 employees at Agconian Media Group. During his tenure, they experienced incredible growth, expanding to 18 countries, 26 offices, and over 800 employees. And remember, Brian was one of the first 10 employees there. He held a number of roles during his tenure, including near the end, he was the Chief Strategy Officer for Agconian Direct. Before Agconian, Brian was Vice President of Business Development at FastClick. FastClick is a Santa Barbara company some of you might know. Brian Coriat, who's also spoken in this class, he spoke last year. Not Brian Coriat. Dave Gross was the founder of FastClick, a Santa Barbara company that was extremely successful and was later went public. Brian was involved in the public IPO, and then it was purchased by ValueClick for $240 million. So an extremely successful exit for FastClick. Before FastClick, Brian was the founder of Ad Monitor for Publishers, where he led that team in significant growth as well, and ultimately to its acquisition by DoubleClick. So you guys sensing a pattern here? Quite an impressive track record. Brian earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in finance from Washington State University. And I appreciate all of my speakers and all of the effort they make to come here. Brian especially, he just came off a long trip in Asia. He drove up the coast. He's going to have a late night and drive back, and he's about to embark on a 20-day trip all through Europe and the Middle East. So he really did make quite an effort to sandwich us in between some extensive travel. And believe me, it's not glamorous. I've traveled quite a bit for business as well, and it's just a drag. It's a grind. So the fact that Brian was able to work us in is impressive, and I highly appreciate it. Let's show him our appreciation.
Thanks, John, and thanks everyone for having me. I'd like to start with a show of hands. Those of you that think you're interested in being involved in a startup right after graduation. Wow, a lot more than I thought. Secondly, I would like to ask how many of you have an entrepreneurial itch that you think you will scratch at some point early after graduation? Almost as many. How many people here actually think they're going to start a company immediately after graduating? Couple brave souls. Great. Well, that's really, really exciting. So obviously a lot of people in here that want to take risks and try to do something different and create change in the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I think, the first thing I want to say is startups aren't for everyone, nor are they by any means easy. Startups and entrepreneurialism is who I am. I truly believe that what we talk about today will also be helpful in all other areas of your life, in any path that you choose. If you want to work for a huge company, hopefully what I cover today will actually be impactful in that path as well. So I think John covered most of the history. I can skip through that. What I can say is along the way, I've learned invaluable lessons, a few of which I would like to share with you today. I'm hopeful that they either will resonate with you now or at some point later on. And some of these lessons can be distilled down to something as simple as a few words or a phrase. Other things are much more complex and didn't make sense to me until years after I was first exposed to them, and it might be the same for you. I'll try to be industry agnostic and provide takeaways that can be applied to any endeavor. And I'll try to be very specific about the 4 things that I'm going to focus on. So the themes that I've chosen for today, the 4 things I want to sort of weave through the rest of this conversation. Number 1 is purpose. Number 2 is values or belief system. Number 3, relationships. And number 4, risk-taking. Seems pretty simple in concept. These things really have everything to do with business, though. This class, being an entrepreneur, being a friend, being an employee. Sitting down to prepare for this discussion allowed me to reflect on some of the most important things that I wish someone would have covered with me when I was your age sitting in these seats. I looked back and thought, off the top of my head, what could it be? I could talk about financing. I could talk about starting a company. I could talk about how to hire employees or find a co-founder. There's tons of information online. There's tons of resources like John. There's tons of access to those types of things. But for me, filling the gap of what I really didn't know is sort of the intangibles of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. And it was these 4 themes that really bubbled up to me and came to mind, and I'd like to share some of the lessons I learned around these themes. So again, 4 themes: purpose, values, relationships, taking risks. So let me talk to you about my relationship with John and why I'm here. He touched on that. So I won't go into the exact detail, but we met each other through my last startup. His venture fund, Rincon Ventures, was kind enough to believe in what we set out to do and believed in us as individuals, which is really what it comes down to. And I'm here because of a relationship, and I think that's one of the 4 things. You're here because of lots of different reasons yourselves, but I'm here because of a relationship. I think the first thing I want to do is distinguish the difference between a relationship and a friendship. So when I was sitting in your seat, it was more about friendships. I had lots of friends all over campus, friends that graduated, friends still in high school. I didn't have a lot of relationships. I probably considered my family a relationship, but really it was kind of more of a friendship in the sense that they're there for you, they don't really judge you, they'll be there for you in the future. But a relationship is something that's much, much different, and I'll get into that in more detail. Gradient X, John explained, just to give you a little bit more context of what we did in 18 months and why someone wanted to come in and buy it, in case you're curious. We essentially took the buying and selling of digital media and made it programmatically traded, which means it's computer automated, computer generated, computer controlled. There's not people calling each other and placing an order, putting it in a system and letting it go. It's essentially like buying and selling stocks on an exchange. And so we automated that process. Our focus was on mobile advertising, so smartphones and tablets, which everything is going that direction. I'm actually surprised I don't see more iPads in here, but that is the wave of the future. And so that's what we actually set out to do, and it became something that was valuable to a company that was investing in the future. So again, I thank John, and I appreciate him having me here and giving me a chance to give back a little bit. So stepping back for a moment and talking a little bit about personal background, hopefully it's somewhat relatable for some of you here. I grew up in a very small town. I was not exposed to much outside of a very small farming community. When I got to college, people said that I lived in a bubble, which was probably true. I had no idea what I wanted to do in life. But I did know at a very young age that I wanted something different than what I had been exposed to. I didn't know what that was. I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was, and I probably hadn't heard the word until I got to college. But I did know a few small business owners in my town that were friends with my family, and I liked the lifestyle that I seemed to view as different from other people in town. It seemed to be appealing to me. What was appealing was they actually seemed to be in control of their lives. My parents, on the other hand, worked for large companies. They complained oftentimes about the hours, or their bosses, or the inflexibility. Their friends did not. They were in control. Secondly, they created jobs, and I thought that was really cool. My dad, for most of his career, worked for a small business owner who was great to him, and I thought that that was a really interesting thing to be able to create and to offer to other people. Thirdly, they actually made more money, and that was pretty evident as far as the makeup of my town. I'll focus more on money later, but from an early age, I think I developed a thought that money was more of a tool than anything else. It was a tool to solve problems. There really wasn't a lot of different class structures in my town, so for me, it wasn't about a status symbol or where you could actually get to with it. It was more of a tool for what problems you could solve with it, and that was important later in life when starting companies. So at a young age, I liked the idea of being in control of my own destiny and in control of the impact that I could make. I started working early on a farm when I was 12 years old. In some countries, that's illegal. But I always made my own money, and it was a lesson that I learned early on, was that I was in control of the money that I could make, which ultimately was the beginning of controlling my own destiny. It created a confidence that money actually could be earned at any time, that I had control over that, so therefore it could also be shared. It was the beginning of what I started to learn was a high regard but a very low attachment for money. And that's also a valuable lesson when I started to create companies and work with other people, because as an entrepreneur, you're the last person standing. You're the last person to pay yourself. Everyone else matters first. So as an entrepreneur, you can't be greedy. Your success depends on the people you surround yourself with. So that's an important relationship that I learned early on in regard to money. Going to college was quite the rude awakening. Small town kid going to a large school. What I quickly learned was that the bar of success that I had envisioned for myself in my own mind was much, much higher than I had imagined. I had no idea where to become or how to become a businessman, this person that I wanted to be. How could I control my own outcome? I didn't know where to start. My school was about 20,000 students, but it was in a town of about 3,000 people in an even smaller farming community. So there was absolutely no exposure outside of the university. So one of the biggest turning points for me was deciding to do a semester abroad, and I studied in London. Who here has ever done a semester abroad? Probably about half. Anyone not a senior considering doing it at some point if you still have time? Good show of hands. I would highly, highly recommend it. Not sure where you come from or how much you've traveled, but for me it was the first time and one of the most impactful times of really understanding what a global economy is and what goes on a global scale. It was interesting. I thought college was a rude awakening. Living in London was an even bigger rude awakening. I went to a school that was called the American College in London. It's no longer there. But what was interesting, it was 75% European and Middle Eastern kids. And coming from Eastern Washington, that was something I hadn't been exposed to. The level of wealth was also a rude awakening. 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds driving Ferraris, owning flats in London. Parents were 3,000 miles away. They had all the money that they needed. How was I going to compete with that? How was I actually going to make a difference? I didn't have any of those resources, nor did I know how they had them. And it really was interesting. How was I actually going to find success? I didn't know. But I became very, very motivated. I decided at that point I was going to come back and graduate and move to Los Angeles and find my way and figure out a path. But that was a definite decision I made at the time. I realized that I had developed a burning desire to create something for myself, something that I controlled, something greater than I believed my current situation could make available. So I believed at that time I had to create change in my life to get access to that. So what I want to talk about now is purpose. You don't have to show your hands, but ask yourselves, who here has a defined purpose? It might be graduating. It might be getting straight A's. It might be not failing John's class. It might be doing a study abroad. One thing I would encourage all of you is to start to think about purpose beyond graduation. What do you want to do with your lives? What do you want to accomplish? Do you want to go to med school? Do you want to go to law school? A lot of you want to become an entrepreneur or at least be involved in that type of an environment. So I would really start to think about what your purpose is and why. Your life will end up exactly how you see it in your mind. And if you don't have a purpose, as many people don't, and you don't consciously plan your life, your subconscious takes over and guides your behaviors and eventually creates your future for you. Some people, however, are very prosperous, rich, happy, just by mistake. But usually it's because they created a very well-defined purpose. Mine was simple. Just get the hell out of Washington State and find opportunity somewhere else. But it was very much influenced by my environment, as yours will be as well. As is the case with each of us, I had to find what it meant for me and how I could actually get in control of it. Unfortunately, hopefully unlike most of you, I didn't study hard enough to do what I wanted to do academically. I didn't have an opportunity to go to law school, grad school, med school. I hadn't put enough emphasis on academics. And I think early on I realized that and realized that I would have to make up for it later in life and pay the price, and that wasn't going to be fun. So do the work now, find your purpose now, and start on it now. Even though I was a finance major, again, lack of exposure is what I'm going to point the finger at. I didn't know what an investment banker was. I didn't know what a venture capitalist was. I didn't know other opportunities that existed for me based on what I was studying. What I knew is that I had been exposed to a few people that owned companies, and I liked what I saw, and that's what I decided to do. Your purpose doesn't have to be as grand as changing the world, although it can be. It's about creating focus. It's about doing things on purpose, not just doing them to do them. So let's jump to one of my first values or beliefs. Live without regret. A good friend of mine, who's also the most decorated American Winter Olympic athlete of all time, wrote a great book called Zero Regrets that reinforces this belief throughout the book. If you haven't read it or haven't heard of it, I would encourage you to download it and check it out. What's interesting is in the book titled Zero Regrets, he talks frequently about passion and how you can actually avoid regret by living with passion. A couple quotes from the book. Passion is the spark for everything. By itself, passion is never enough, just like talent is never enough. But it is your fire starter for what you want to do. Without passion, you will never do something 100%. And if you don't do it 100%, then why do it at all? You have to figure out who you want to be, not what you want to be, but who you want to be. You have to have a vision, a dream, and a plan. Then you chase it with everything that you have. All from the book. Very powerful stuff. It's a tricky one to understand, though. Regret. What does that actually mean? I don't want to be misunderstood with this, and of course, it doesn't mean to say, don't have a conscience, do whatever you want, and don't worry about it. Nor does it assume you did your best and that's good enough. It means for every decision you make, everything you do, act on what you truly believe you will never regret. If it turns out to be the wrong decision, then you can't regret it. You can't be held back by guilt or fear that you made a bad choice. It's just a mistake, or better yet, a learning experience. And I believe it's something you should weave into how you make decisions today. I knew that I would not regret leaving my friends and family and moving to Los Angeles and trying to find my way. I knew staying in Washington, following my friends to Seattle, and getting a job, a normal job at some company, is something that I would regret. I knew I would always be able to go back, but I would most likely never leave if I went there. So within 2 weeks of arriving in LA, I landed a job at an internet startup. It was not a good fit. Common wisdom told me, stick it out. Get 2 years on your resume. It's your first job. Don't be an idiot. This was also 1998. What I was unaware of was how massive this would-be internet boom was about to become. I wish I could say I had the foresight and saw it coming, or even read the papers or the trades and knew it was already here, but it's not why I left. It didn't fit my personal values that I was starting to develop consciously or subconsciously. After about 5 months, I finally got a call from two guys I had met a few months earlier that I barely knew, and they told me they were starting a company. They wanted to build a web hosting business. I didn't really know what that was. The CEO was 21 years old. He dropped out of UCSB, was on leave, and he had about a $50,000 inheritance from his grandmother. He learned how to do day trading, and within about 2 months doubled that to about $100,000 and figured that was enough to start a business. So I joined the two of them. I barely knew them, and it was my first entrepreneurial adventure. We were one of the first companies in Los Angeles to offer DSL. No one had heard of it. I hadn't heard of it. I didn't know how to explain it, and I didn't know what it was, but it sounded interesting. So how do you sell something to people that don't know that they need it? That's what we had to figure out. And that was my first opportunity to really be independently creative in solving problems. So you ask, why would I do it? Because I had nothing to lose. I didn't like what I was doing. I didn't like the values of the company. I didn't like the people that I was working with. These two new guys, one of them I really liked, and the other one was super smart, and that was good enough for me. LA wasn't exactly a hotbed compared to Silicon Valley at the time. These were the only two guys I knew of that were starting a company and actually had cash. So for me, it was a calculated risk. Again, one of our other themes. And I took it. Knowing that my core beliefs would not leave me feeling any ounce of regret, no matter what. About 10 months later, a larger hosting company came in and acquired us. I had no idea how equity structures worked. I had no idea what percent of the company I owned. The other two did very well. I was able to pay off one student loan. Luckily, I only had one. So the lessons learned from that was what I started to sort of put in the back of my head is things to think about for the future, and again, things you can never regret. The other two took stock, though, and acquired and joined the acquiring company. I had decided not to join because it seemed like the new company wasn't very innovative or exciting compared to some other things that I had started to become exposed to. A friend of mine who left college and decided to go to Seattle and not take a risk, took a job, was one of the first 4 or 5 employees at one of the first digital advertising agencies in the world called Avenue A at the time. Avenue A went on to become Quantive, was a global success, and was acquired by Microsoft for $6 billion. So did I regret that either? No. There was a lot of downtime in the meantime, and a lot of people got hurt along the way, but it turned out to be a very successful organization. But in 1999, he kept telling me about digital advertising, about internet and tech companies. Even though we were a hosting company, we weren't really a digital tech company. So he introduced me to a company called L90. It was a startup in Santa Monica, and said, you have to go work for these guys. If you're not going to move back to Seattle, you have to go join this company. So he introduced me to a person there. I learned that they sold digital advertising solutions to him at the agency, and it sounded like a great opportunity. I finally felt the boom was happening. Everyone was going to be rich. Everyone was talking about getting rich, no matter what the age, 22 years old, 52 years old. I joined L90, and it was about 30 people at the time in a business development role. I took it because I could tell it was a hot company, defining a completely new advertising medium and creating something that didn't exist. But most importantly, it's because I was going to report to one of the founders, a guy I immediately clicked with and trusted. This was now late 1999. My 2 friends that had joined the new company without me, that had bought us, were acquired for $450 million by a larger company. Did I regret my decision now? No. Why? Because we were doing great things at L90. But most importantly, at that very early stage in my career, I was learning 2 of the most important things in business. I was learning about relationships and culture. And I knew, even then, that it was going to be invaluable. I remember specific conversations with colleagues the day the news of their IPO came out. So not only did they get acquired for $450 million, but then they went public for $2.6 billion or something like that. And I knew at that point that money was not the most important thing. I knew that relationships were the most important element of business and ultimately of success. Of course, we all know what happened next. Crap hit the fan. I was told I'm not supposed to cuss up here. Everything blew up, and I mean everything. Massive layoffs, companies going out of business faster than you can count. My 2 friends that were worth a ton of money, nothing, didn't make a dime. I didn't make a dime. No one did. Not many people anyways. The experience, though, was golden. What I learned on the way down was as valuable as what I learned on the way up, if not more. Much of that experience wasn't realized, though, until much later in life, where it was fully appreciated. Until it came time to recreate some of those situations, and I had experience that I could pull from and the opportunity to choose differently. What we all walked away with, though, was relationships. I can't count how many of mine are still intact and still important in my life. You are your greatest resource of success. Those you surround yourself with are the second greatest resource. The company you keep, the decisions you make, all influence the relationship outcomes that you're left with. L90 was about culture. Ours was incredible. It really was a team. Egos were relatively low, or at least in check. What was interesting, though, is knowing what I know now about culture is that it was very organic. So in a sense, we were somewhat lucky. Perhaps it was because the company was built during the boom time, when any idea was backed by VC funding, You could likely take the company public, make lots of money. There were no concerns about hiring your best friends and inviting 10 more people you went to college with to join you. But at the same token, something happened. There were shared values. There were like-minded people that were hired, and there was a cultural outcome. It's important to start to understand what your personal values are now before you join the workforce, so that when you do decide to take a job, or which startup to join, or which company to form, which co-founder to choose, you know if yours are a fit with theirs. L90 ended on a good note, however. I ran the technology sales division prior to the crash, and we were doing very, very well. We were competing against 3 or 4 other companies in the space, one of which was the 800-pound gorilla, DoubleClick. There was a conversation earlier about Kevin O'Connor. He was the CEO. He now resides in Montecito, has a couple startups, and is very influential. This company was massively successful. They had over 80% market share. It was daunting. The few customers we had told us at the time that our product was far superior. We thought we could beat the 800-pound gorilla on feature innovation alone. Again, looking back, this happened organically. We had one great product guy, a couple good software developers, one who happened to be amazing. I aligned myself with her, and we focused on DoubleClick's weaknesses. Her name is Julie, and she's one of the most talented software developers I've ever met. The relationship grew. I brought her with me to my next 3 companies, including Gradient X, where she was my co-founder. Again, the power of relationships is incredible. So at the peak at L90, I had about 7 to 8 salespeople. They had a massive global sales force, hundreds of people on their entire tech team. We still somehow saw an opportunity. Their customers were unhappy, apathetic about the product at best. We believed so deeply in this opportunity that it set in motion something in my belief system that came to make sense later in another company, Adconian Direct, which John also mentioned. And that is that everything is an opportunity. How could fighting an 800-pound gorilla with that kind of market share be an opportunity? Why not, we asked ourselves. We started picking off their customers one by one, and then it turned into left and right, large, small, and everything in between. We listened to what they had to say and continuously innovated and created a massive gap between our technology and theirs. Unfortunately, though, as time went on, the market kept going south, and there was not enough that we could do to offset the other financial drains on the business. So DoubleClick came in 2001 and acquired our technology business to buy back their customers, take our product roadmap, and incorporate our features. Not what we had hoped for, but the best form of flattery nonetheless. Aside from our tremendous success and great culture overall, there was one thing that really bothered me towards the end, though. A few executives developed a zero-sum game attitude towards the competitors. Potentially, this was driven by the demise of the economy. There was definitely some anxiety around that. But at the end of the day, they kept talking about how the competition sucked, how they wanted to kill the competition. Banners went up all around the office, destroy the competition. Everyone must die. This is very common amongst executives. Bill Gates, somewhat successful executive, was probably the biggest offender in his day. Interestingly, though, many executives change their tune over time, and as they get older, they realize it doesn't have to be this way. They realize it's not good for culture. I didn't know why it bothered me at the time, but again, later at Adconian Direct, it came to light. We'd acquired a company called Frontline Direct in 2008. Their core purpose was win-win. Their approach was vastly different than ours. In every aspect of their business, internally within their culture, externally with their partners and their friends, they instilled this incredibly powerful belief. It is something that I encourage each of you to think about in your own relationships and friendships. It isn't merely a business belief. It's applicable to all aspects of life. The minute someone thinks you're trying to get more than what is fair, they're going to try to do the same to you. Or, if they don't see it until it's too late, they will likely regret it, or worse, regret you. I first learned of this principle, though, in Stephen Covey's book, best-selling book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Has anyone here read this book? 2, 3? Everyone should read this book as soon as you can. In case you don't have time to do it tonight, I'll give you a little bit of an insight. The 7 habits are as follows, and I'm not giving away the punchline because the true secret sauce is how you instill them in your life. Number 1, be proactive. Number 2, begin with the end in mind. Number 3, put first things first. 4, and most relevant to this, think win-win. 5, seek to first understand, then to be understood. 6, synergize, which basically means find a commonality in what you're trying to do with other people, make it work. And number 7 is sharpen the saw. What that means is be sharp yourself. Learn, study, read, sleep, exercise, eat well, take care of yourself, be sharp. Win-win is an aspect to doing something else I want to talk about called adding value. What's interesting is John mentioned this in a sidebar conversation at the beginning of class. We have become a society, I believe, that is seen by many others as well, especially outside of this country, as an entitled society. I can tell you this does not work in the business world, especially in the startup world. Possibly in a larger organization where there's politics, but definitely not in a small organization. Companies are passing over qualified candidates who lack the mentality of contribution, of adding value. A very valuable lesson I learned was to have the mentality of striving to add more value than you take in return. The most successful relationships with your company, with your professor, your organization, any other individual, should be symbiotic, mutually beneficial. Your goal in every important relationship in life should be, I see your value and I raise you one. Give more than you expect to get, always. You will never be disappointed. So after the dust settled from DoubleClick acquiring us at L90, I was burned out. The market was in the toilet. I didn't want to work for anyone else at the time. Too much collateral damage was done, and it was time to regain control. So I found the first 2 buddies that wanted to start a company. We had no plan, no direction, no ideas, no money. We just knew that we didn't want the alternative. This was not a good idea. While we bootstrapped it for a couple years, we just never could get on the same page of what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it. Once it was set in motion, it was in motion. We also couldn't decide on a leader. We all 3 wanted to be in charge. We all thought we could share the responsibility. Trust me, shared accountability is no accountability. So in 2004, after about 2.5 years of working with my friends in a relatively successful manner, I got a call from someone at a startup here in Santa Barbara. John mentioned them, FastClick. I had met one of the co-founders in the industry and had developed a very good relationship with him. He said the company was killing it and that I needed to leave my friends and my own company, my family that I had in Los Angeles at the time, and move to Santa Barbara and join him. After one meeting with he and the CEO, I was sold. The metrics were solid. The plan to continue the growth was incredibly focused. The company was called FastClick, and I joined as part of the new executive team they were building. And we were very successful. Early on, we raised $60 million in financing. We took it public on the NASDAQ, and we sold it for about $230 million, all within 18 months. That was quite the ride. Again, what was more important, though, were the relationships I made, both internally and industry-wide, as well as the values and lessons that were developed and learned. The culture at FastClick was the best I had yet experienced. Their values were explicit. It wasn't accidental, perhaps like L90. They were all over the walls, they were distributed widely, they were talked about openly. They were agreed upon by all, or at least by most. Our customers, our partners, those on both sides of our business were sacred to us. We looked after their utmost interests at all times, as if their business would make or break our business. Customer retention was paramount. What was different about FastClick was that the founders treated the employees differently. Everyone was part of the team, and it was our job to carry that torch forward as the company transitioned. Being in Santa Barbara, though, hiring was very difficult. We outgrew the talent pool that eventually impacted growth. We were geographically constrained. A recurring lesson learned: people matter most. We were forced to hire people without maybe the experience that we desired, but they were great people. They were motivated, they were proactive, and they were supported by a culture that wanted to see them win, and we did. The timing of the sale was opportune for me. Several guys who I'd built great relationships with over the years in LA had just funded a new startup that was launched, of all places, in Munich, Germany. One gentleman had a non-compete in the US. We liked the business model. We wanted to continue to execute on the business model, and so we looked to Europe to do that. The company name, what else? Euroclick. Very original. The mission, though, was to replicate the success of FastClick to some degree, L90 to some degree, and others that we had worked closely with in the industry across the European market. The US was coming back, and while competition was increasing, Europe, however, was underserved. We had about 10 employees in the company when I joined. I was able to invest some of the money I made in FastClick and have some real skin in the game and feel like it was part of mine. We set out with a goal of expanding throughout Western Europe with a likely outcome of being acquired by a large US media company like AOL or Yahoo within 18 to 24 months. We continued to grow, though, for the next 2.5 years at a frenetic pace. I specifically launched our technology team out of Santa Monica, and we were heads down on building our own proprietary technology. I also oversaw business development, and we were looking to grow by acquisitions as well. We had just completed our first acquisition in Australia, expanding now into Asia Pac, and decided it was time to go back to the US and focus on where we were from. We were introduced to a company out of San Diego that was talking to acquirers, and it turned out that the founders were people we knew. We built relationships with them in 1999 to 2000, although we hadn't seen them for years. Once we spoke to them, it clicked immediately. It clicked immediately. The deal moved very quickly and was completed by early 2008. They were only 15 people at the time, but had tremendous potential and were growing rapidly. At that point, I saw so much opportunity that I shifted my entire focus to working with this company and keeping them separate from the rest of the business. Within 3 years, we grew the company from 15 people and $15 million to 100 people and $100 million in revenue at a very profitable margin. The company was the culmination of almost every positive belief, ideal, methodology, value, and practice I had ever seen. The CEO was and is incredibly dynamic, incredibly effective. She and her company have won numerous awards since I left, including Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, best places to work in San Diego, Santa Monica, and other offices. And you might be thinking, what makes them so special? Lots of things. But the most important things, I believe, are their core values, their win-win belief system, and their incredible appetite for taking risk. Failing is an option. Just fail fast. And their focus, 100% on the employees. It's all about the people. I had the privilege of working at Iconian for almost 7 years, and this team directly for the past 4 years. And what I learned, or solidified the learning of, much of what I know now is because of my experience there, and that's what I take with me in business today. So why did I leave? Everything was going great. The company still is doing very well today. Why? Opportunity and timing. It was a great risk. It was because the relationships of 3 other people that wanted to start this company with me, one of which is the CEO whom I just mentioned. The other 2 were entrepreneurs that I had known and worked with for years, been involved in their companies to some degree. And we founded Gradient X in March of 2012. Just the 3 of us. We had no employees, no other co-founders, just an idea and a couple of people that wanted to support it. So the first call that I made was to Julie, the unbelievable engineer that I mentioned that I worked with 3 times prior. Now we had an incredible co-founder, we had money, we had a great idea. It was time for round 4. Julie and I were off to the 4th company, but we needed one more. We enlisted recruiters. We didn't know anyone personally that could fit the role. Julie is brilliant, but she prefers to work without direct reports. So we needed a CTO, someone highly technical with experience that could also hire and manage people. We saw a slew of candidates, many of which I would have hired as an employee, a VP of engineering, someone at a very high level within the organization. But we wanted a co-founder, someone who was going to feel the same level of commitment and responsibility that we had. And then a resume came in. The name sounded familiar. I thought to myself, have I met this person before? Yes, I had, once, at a club, late at night. We had a very good mutual friend. Our companies had made a lot of money together over time, and this was a very, very high trust relationship with this mutual friend. So this led to the hiring of our 3rd co-founder and CTO, Mike Lum, who is, again, incredibly talented and amazing. We now had an all-star team. I'd been fundraising in parallel, and we closed $3.75 million with a 5-page PowerPoint and the 3 of us along the way. Why? Because of relationships and trust. The relationships that I didn't have, I had through someone else. It was all based on relationships. No one was going to invest in a company where they had no connection to the founders. They just heard a pitch, saw 5 slides, and were sold. We're not that good. We had relationships. We also had trust, and now it was time to execute. So we set our course and didn't deviate, not much at least. There were naysayers, people that I even worked with that thought I made a bad decision, but it didn't matter. We executed as if our lives depended on it, and in my mind they did, at least our relationships did. Those are of the utmost importance to me. But now I had new responsibilities, investors, employees. This created an increased drive for success. Failure was not an option. Within our small team, people were starting to get married early on, having babies, 2 more on the way. This was a lot of pressure. It's exactly what I needed. It was the drive. The customer feedback was incredible early on. We had truly built what most considered to be the best product in the industry very quickly. We continued to innovate and break through new barriers. And then strategic phone calls started coming in. Larger companies were looking for what we had built. We were 15 months in and having tremendous success. So why sell? Why do it now? Because the offer that came in, the one that we decided on, was a win-win. Everybody won. It's very rare when the stars align and you can actually say that everyone truly comes out ahead. Of course, you dream of being the next Snapchat or Twitter or Pinterest, but those outcomes are rare, very, very, very rare. The reason not to sell and strive for a 2x of what we got, a 3x of what we got, ego. That was the only good reason I could come up with not to sell, ego. And to me, that wasn't a good reason. We had an opportunity where everyone would come out ahead, and we can continue to finish what we started to build. We can continue to have pride in our work and stability for our employees. For us, it was the right decision, and it was the right outcome. Was it luck? What is luck? I was told when I was young that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Always be prepared. Always have purpose. Always see the opportunity in a situation. So, since there are so many people that want to do a startup, I'm going to read something. There were many people who were going to go into a traditional workforce. I probably wouldn't. And this might be a little eye-opening, but for me, it hit home the moment that I read it. This was on Quora. Someone posted the question, what's it like to be a startup entrepreneur? What's it like to found a company? And this is the answer that bubbled to the top. And I'll read it to you verbatim. Very tough to sleep most nights of the week. Weekends don't mean anything to you anymore. Closing a round of financing is not a relief. It means more people are depending on you to turn their investment into 20 times what they gave you. It's very difficult to turn it off. But at the same time, television, movies, vacations become so boring when your company's future might be sitting in your inbox. The results of the next A/B test, the next star hire that accepted the offer. You feel guilty when you're doing something outside of the company. Only through years of wrestling with this internal fight do you recognize how the word balance is an art. It is just as important as any other skill you have as a CEO. You begin to see how valuable creativity is and that you must think differently, not only to win, but to see that big opportunity. You recognize you get your best ideas when you're not staring at a screen. You see immediate returns on healthy distractions. You start to respect the duck. Paddle like hell underwater and be smooth and calm on the top. You learn the hard way that if you lose control, you lose. You always ask yourself, am I changing the world in a good way? Are people's lives better for having known me? You are creative, and when you have an idea, it has no filter because it becomes a reality. This feeling you can't do doing anything else. You start to see the word entrepreneur as a personality. It's difficult to talk to your friends that are not risking the same things as you because they are content with not pushing themselves or putting it all out there to the public with the likelihood of failure staring at you in the face every day. You start to turn down a lot of conversations with relatives. You turn the conversations into how they might exploit things for profit, how they might turn their idea into a business. Those close to you will view your focus as something completely different because they don't understand. You don't blame them. They can't understand. They haven't done it. It's why you will gravitate towards other entrepreneurs. You will find reward in helping other entrepreneurs, much reward in helping other entrepreneurs. Your job is to create vision, a culture, to get the right people on the bus at the right time, to inspire. When you look around a team that believes in the vision as much as you do and trusts you will do the right thing at all times, it's a feeling that can't be explained. The exponential productivity from great people will always amaze you. It's why defining the right team is the most difficult thing you will do, but the most important. This learning will affect your life significantly. You will not settle for things anymore because you will see what is possible when you hold out for the best and you push to find people who are the best. You don't have a problem anymore being honest with people about not cutting it. You start to see that you're a leader and you have to lead, or you can't be involved in it at all. You turn down acquisition offers because you need to run the show and you feel like your team is the best in the world and you can do anything with hard work. Not true for all of us. Quitting, although, is not an option. You have to be willing to sleep in your car, sleep on the couch, and laugh about it. You have to be able to laugh at many things because when you think of the worst things in the world that could happen to your company, they will happen. Imagine working for something for 2 years and having to throw it away completely because one day you see that it's wrong. You realize that if your team is having fun and can always laugh, you won't die. And in fact, the opposite will happen. You will learn to love the journey and look forward to what you do every day at the lowest times. You'll hear not to get too low when things are bad and not too high when things are great. But you'll never take that advice because being in the middle all the time isn't exciting. Even keel is never worth missing out on something worth celebrating. You'll become addicted to finding the hardest challenges because there's a direct relationship between how difficult something is and the euphoria you feel when you've achieved the impossible. You realize that it's much more fun when you didn't have money than when you did. Money might be the worst thing you could have for a personal goal. If you're lucky enough to genuinely feel this way, it's a surreal feeling that is the closest thing to peace because you realize challenges and the work are what you love. Your currencies are freedom, autonomy, responsibility, and recognition. Those happen to be the same currencies of the people you want around you. You feel like a parent to your customers in the way that they will never realize how much you love them, and it's they who validate that you're not crazy. You want to hug every one of them. They mean the world to you. You learn the most about yourself more than any other vocation as an entrepreneur. You learn what you do when you get punched in the face many times. You learn what you do when no one is looking and when no one would find out. You learn that you are bad at many things, lucky if you're good at a handful, and the only thing you could ever be great at is being yourself, which is why you can never compromise it. You learn how power and recognition can be addicting and how it could also corrupt so many. You become incredibly grateful for the times that things were going bad as they possibly could, because most people would never get to see that in any other calling. When things are really bad, there are people that come running. They come to help, they don't ask for anything in return, they don't think about it twice. You begin to realize that in life, the luckiest people in the world only get one shot at being part of something great. Knowing this helps you make sense of your commitment and your decision. Of all the things said, though, it's extremely exciting. Every day is different and so exciting. Even when it's bad, it's exciting. Knowing that your decision will not only affect you but many others is a weight that I would rather have on my shoulders any day than not controlling my future. That's why I could not do anything else. I read that often. My advice to you, especially as many people that want to be in entrepreneurial organizations, is there is no better time in the history of the world to start a company than right now. Barriers are at an all-time low. Technology, innovation is at your fingertips. Cash is almost inconsequential to get a prototype or an idea off the ground. Once you have one, cash is readily available. Talent and knowledge is widespread. Big ideas are bigger than ever. Elon Musk, co-founder of PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, really has set the bar. There are lots of people that are close behind him, though. The simplicity and scale of products like Snapchat. This is the most exciting time I have ever seen. I'm jealous with what John gets to do. Invest in companies, talk to entrepreneurs, and teach the next ones. If you're contemplating it, I say do it. Make the leap. At the end of the day, it's something you will never regret, and that is something I can guarantee. That's it.
Live with no regrets. Who's got the first question?
Hi. Great job, by the way. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
But my question is, early in your talk, you mentioned that you had friendships in college and very few relationships. What's the biggest differences between the two, and how would you evolve friendships into relationships?
Great question. From my perspective, the difference is a friendship is based on a variety of different things. It could be you grew up together, it could be that you're family, it could be that you have common interests. A relationship in the context of business is much more about the value exchange. What you actually get out of it, what you put into it, and how it actually drives values for others, what it actually turns into. So a relationship for me is where you can actually, get something completely outside of, the friendship aspect out of it. Maybe it's introduction, maybe it's money, maybe it's an idea, maybe it's coaching. It's something that's outside of the fact that you might also like to go grab a beer and hang out. Is there a second part to the question?
How would you evolve these friendships? But
Sure, that's a great question. I think, taking it from the angle of what I would have done differently, I probably would have looked at friendships that I had in college, and as I was serious about, becoming an entrepreneur and controlling my own destiny, I probably would have looked at those friendships and saw where, there were some commonalities in beliefs, and saw where there was complements, in strengths. And I think that's something I didn't have time to talk about. I know we were time sensitive, but I think really finding, strengths that actually complement what you're good at are the most important things in relationships. You don't need a lot of relationships where you're the exact same as the other person. You need, differentiation. You need something that they have that you don't, and you have that they don't. So I would start to look for that in friendships and see where there's, a baseline of common values and interests, and, some complements that you could leverage as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So you mentioned the book. I forgot what the author's name was. Could I?
I mentioned two. There was Zero Regrets, and the other one was Seven Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
It's Stephen Covey.
Okay, and also you've mentioned risk-taking a lot, and I know you did take a lot of risks along the way. Which do you think was your greatest risk and the greatest reward?
Wow, great question. I hope this isn't a disappointing answer, but I would say the most recent ones, because I think, the older you get, it's easier to slip into a habit of maybe not, wanting to take more risks or to get comfortable. I also think the older you get, if you're making the right decision and taking risks, you take bigger ones. So I think for me, for example, leaving, a great company that we had built to 800 people that hadn't yet seen what we were ultimately working towards, which was an exit, and leaving before that, I think, people viewed it as a huge risk. But, you sort of have to weigh that. And so I think, maybe that could be my biggest risk, but, I think as you continue on, they're all different. So it's the one you just made is the biggest one.
I have a question. You spoke about being sharp.
Sorry, we got one mic.
You mentioned the importance of culture. What are some specific things that you've done at Gradient X and that you continue to do to keep that Gradient company culture?
Sure. That's a great question. And for me, it was a very different experience at Gradient X because we are almost 100% software developers. My experience was at companies where you had a much lower mix of engineers, like maybe 10, 20% of the company. Previous companies were a much more sales and marketing oriented type of business where you have a lot more extroverts and outgoing people that are super into culture, and they'll put their arms around it and they'll run with it and they'll start to develop it themselves. Engineers are a little bit different, even though ours are awesome and tons of fun and great people to hang out with. Different things drive them, so we really had to adapt. So for us, it was hard for me to say, okay, giving them cool things to work on, cool technologies to use, and interesting problems to solve builds culture. What I'd done before was things like, setting goals, setting revenue goals, setting metric goals, taking people to, we did everything from horse races to Mardi Gras to Super Bowl, you name it, we took people when they hit goals. And those were big things that influenced culture. We did lots of little things too, but for engineers it was different. It was more about what can I actually do? What can I solve? What can I build? So I had to adapt to that, and luckily I have two great co-founders that are engineers, and so they helped me really sort of understand what we needed to do, and it was really around creating interesting problems, making sure that they were always challenged, making sure that they didn't have roadblocks, and then creating an environment that was, fun for them to come in, sit, and pound away for 12, 13 hours a day.
Thanks.
Sure.
Another one in the back corner.
Hey, Brian, thanks for the words. Over here. On the side.
Oh, there we
How's
go.
it going? So as somebody in a hiring role, it's kind of a two-headed question. How highly do you value GPA, and how highly do you value an MBA for someone who wants to be an entrepreneur?
Great question. Because I read the core answer, I actually left a couple of pages out. One page spoke specifically to GPA. At Adconian Direct, we hired, it was very much sort of sales and marketing, people out of non-engineering schools from the university. We hired the 15 to 100 rate that I mentioned. We only had 5 developers, so it was all people that came from anywhere from communications to business to marketing majors. And we learned quickly that GPA was actually the strongest signal in hiring people right out of university. Thank God that didn't happen for me. I wouldn't have been hired. But we looked at a variety of things. We also did, have you heard of Gallup polls? There's a book called Strengths Finders. We used that on everyone we were about to make an offer to, and it illustrates their top 4 strengths. We started to see a very strong correlation between the strength of being an achiever and GPA, like a very high correlation. And so we actually, just started looking at GPA, and we'd all sort of, when we decided to hire someone, we'd be like, I bet they're a 3.9, I bet they're a 3.8, and sure enough, all the time. So for us, it was GPA, and the reason why is because GPA for us, 9 times out of 10, once you hired a high GPA, they actually were independent, they could think on their own, and they wanted to achieve, they wanted to get things done. I would see a correlation to like what John mentioned. Hey, if you just finish the class and you can write your paper and turn it in early, high achievers do that shit, right? They'll just get it done. They hate things looming. So for us, it's a great question. One of the most incredible signals for achievement and someone that can actually come in and make a difference in the company was GPA. MBA, to your second point, I would never discourage anyone from education. Getting your MBA or any other degree is the right thing to do no matter what. But at the end of the day, competitive advantage, it depends on the company. For us, it wasn't important. If you can get a specific skill set out of that degree, then that's a tremendous advantage. But if you made it through a good university with a strong GPA and you've really become an achiever and you can demonstrate that, that's what we looked for.